and I am thankful that I can share the Shabbat with you. And I pray that the words that we will speak will touch our hearts, and that today, a day when we set it apart to worship God, I pray that He will be the focus of all that we do. Now, I am going to be sharing the screen. If I have the, I hope that you can see that. I do not have any, if you can't see that, somebody let me know. Otherwise, I trust that you can see the PowerPoint. The parasha that we have today is called Because. And I entitled this message, Because of What He Did, We Remember. So the name of the parasha means because, and it's found in the beginning of the parasha, as we heard it, beautifully read. Now, in this parasha, Moses continues his closing address to the children of Israel. And you probably recall that the book of Deuteronomy, the Hebrew word is davarim, which means the words. And in the Greek translation is called Deuteronomy. From the word deutero means twice, nomos, law. So Moses, the whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell speech, reminding the people that after 40 years, when they are about to enter into the promised land, he wants them to remember. Now, there's a summary of what he wants them to remember. This whole passage in Deuteronomy, as it was read, contains a lot of things. But the main thing is that he says he's sharing with them the blessings that they have received. He reminds them that it is by God's grace and because of His love. So what we have in this parasha is the blessing of obedience, and we see that in the very opening of this passage. And he says, because the Lord, he's in this promise, in his opening passage, he's telling the children of Israel, remember all the blessings that you have received from the Lord. So he goes on and he lists all the things that the Lord did, but there are also some warnings, and we have got to take heed of the warnings. He says, then it shall come about, but when you listen to the judgment and keep it, He will love and bless you and multiply you. And he's saying here at the very beginning of this parasha that God will bless them. And this is the beautiful thing. God is saying, I will bless you. I will bless you abundantly because of the promise that I made to your forefathers, because I am who I am. And I will bless you because you are my special people. You are my chosen people. You're a holy nation, a nation of priests. I will love you and bless you and multiply. I will multiply the fruit of your wombs. And then he goes on to say all the blessings that they will receive because God is faithful to his promise. Now, not only is God telling them here at the end of reminding them of all the blessings that they will receive, but he is also saying something else. He is remembering, hey, you're not perfect. You're not, God is not blessing you because of how great you are. Remember how much he fell? You remember? And he's telling me, remember how many times you failed me? So he reminds me that the rebellion when they worshiped the golden calf, when Moses was in Mount Sinai, waiting to receive the Torah, while Moses was in Mount Sinai. God is talking to him. What are the children of Israel doing? Building a golden calf and worshiping an idol. It didn't take long for Israel to start worshiping a false idol. He also reminds them the rebellion that followed, the rebellion of Korah. And he also reminds them, you remember when I sent the 12 spies to scout the promised land? You didn't like, you listened to their scourge words instead of listening to Joshua and Caleb. So because of their disobedience, God said, you're not going to enter into the promised land. So he reminds them of the many times that they failed. He reminds men of the angering of God at Evriah, who was about to destroy them unless Moses interceded, because they were complaining all the time. The rebellion and Massah in Kivrot Hatavah, the grapes of lust. And he says, you have been rebellious against God. He's reminding them, you have been rebellion against God. And since he says, since the day I knew you. So it was nothing new. Was it an exception that Israel was rebellious against God? It happened again and again. Now, he also reminds them that in the 40 years that they were in the desert, it's a beautiful passage. Go in chapter 8, verse 2 and 3. It says, you shall remember all the way in which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know that it was your heart. He humbled you and let you be hungry, but fed you with the manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. So he sustained them. And he goes on. I wouldn't have the time to go into the parasha. It was already read, but remember, your shoes didn't wear out, your clothes didn't wear out, you didn't have, you were fed the manna, and when you complained, didn't have any meat, I ate quails, and you had everything that you needed. Not everything you wanted, but everything that you needed. He goes on, and he goes to in details, telling them the land you're about to enter. They did not know about that land. Well, when the spies came back, said, "Oh, this is beautiful, and the grapes are so big that we had to carry the grapes on poles because they were so big." And you ever see the symbol of the Ministry of Tourism in Israel? It's two men carrying huge grapes in on one pole. That's the land. The land that you're going to go, you will have. He said you will have. And he mentions it's a land flowing milk and honey, and he will bless you when you enter into promised land with 7 kinds. And he mentions barley, wheat, grapevines, figs, pomegranates, olive oil, and dates. And it's the place that people will know that God is a faithful God, and He's a God who provides. He also says, when you enter there, remember, you're going to destroy all the idols. Don't let them be, because they will turn you away from worshiping me. So one of the commandments of God is that when you enter into the promised land, destroy everything that is not holy, because you will be tempted to follow other gods. He's also saying, when you get there, don't say, "Oh my goodness, look what I've done. Look how much I've accomplished. I went through 40 years in the desert, and here I am, and now I can enjoy because of I'm so smart, I'm so wise." And he said, "No, don't be proud. It wasn't you who did it. It was I who brought you into the promised land." So what he is saying here again and again, don't forget to remember. And if I had to put a title to this morning drive, I would say, don't forget to remember. Now, it says here, remembering or not forgetting, chapter 8, verse 2 of this parasha, it says, you shall remember, and repeats this word, you shall remember, several times. So, as Moses is given the farewell address before they continue to the promised land, you remember that Moses was not allowed, he would not enter the promised land. He led them through the desert for 40 years, but it was Joshua who entered into the promised land and who conquered the promised land. But I said, remember, I will not be there to remind you. I will be gone. I remember the Lord took him and he died in Mount Nebo. But he was able to see the land from a faraway distance, but he was not. Now, remembering and not forgetting is part of this week's parasha. Because you are listening to these rules and keeping and obeying them, Adonai your God will keep with you the covenant and mercy that he swore to his fathers. Now, There are two or three things here. And I mean, three key words that we see in the passage. One is that because of what he did, remember. But in order to remember, you have to listen. That is why I have highlighted here the word listen. If we don't listen to what God did, if we don't listen, if we don't remember. Now, for Jewish people, remembrance is essential. For Jews, remembering is a holy business. When we remember, we're able to bring the past to the present. The past is present in the event that we remember now. And our response to that memory is our response to the event itself and to the saving acts of God. If you want to remember, you got to pay attention. You got to pay attention in order to remember. This is why is Moses spending his time reminding them again and listen, Shema, hear, oh Israel, Shema, Shema. We repeat that. Listen, listen, listen. Listen means paying attention. Now, it says here, you are to remember everything of the way in which Adonai led you to these 40 years in the desert, humbling and testing you in order to know what was in your heart, whether you would obey his mitzvot or not. And then in another section, Moshe adds, think deeply about it. In chapter 8, verse 11, the parasha said, be careful not to forget. Remember, be careful not to forget Adonai your God by not obeying his mitzvot, rulings and regulations that I'm giving you today. Now, I believe that in every moment, there are things that we need to remember. In verse 19, Moses reminds us why this is important. He says, if you forget Adonai your God, you will follow other gods and worship them. And he gives a warning. Guess what's going to happen? I'm warning you in advance today that you will certainly perish. Did God ever have to punish Israel for forgetting to walk? Yeah. When you look at the Tanakh, the history of the people of Israel, most of the time they were disobedient. Now, how many times the Lord had to punish them? And he had to send, during the time of the judges, he had to send other nations to punish the Israelites. And remember when he had to send them to exile, when he allowed in 721 the northern 10 tribes to go into exile to Assyria. And the southern kingdom of Judah was a little more faithful. And, in the northern kingdom, there were 33 kings, and all of them were evil, according to the book of Kings and Chronicles. In the southern kingdom, there were in the northern kingdom were 31 kings and 33 kings in the southern kingdom. And of the 33, only 4 were faithful to God. So God is saying, I will punish you. And did he punish you? Yeah, he sent them to Babylonian captivity. And in modern times, is the destruction of the temple and the expulsion of the Jews by the Romans from the land until the year, the 20th century, the beginning of the 19th century, 20th century. Israel was in exile because God said, if you disobey me, I will punish you. I will punish you. Now, in the people would say, God has forgotten us. God has abandoned us. No, God has not abandoned you. If you don't see God, it's not because he's unfaithful. He's faithful. The problem is that I don't have the time to go into the detail, but it's a beautiful book that I recommend everybody to read by the great Jewish theologian, Martin Buber, the philosopher. And it's called The Eclipse of God. And you know what an eclipse is, right? Let's say the earth is here and the sun is there And because of the movement of the moon around the earth, every so many years, the moon blocks the light of the sun. And we can see it. For a few moments, we can't see the sun because something is blocking the sun. And it's called an eclipse. And Martin Buber says that sometimes we have created eclipses, our own things, our own way of doing things, or not walking with the Lord, and we say, the Lord is not there. It's like an eclipse. You say, well, the sun has disappeared. No, the sun has not disappeared. It's an eclipse because something is blocking the light from the sun. And sometimes in our lives, we allow things to block the light that comes from God. And Israel said, and this is a portion of the Haftorah that we read today in Isaiah 49:14. And the Israelites, they don't see the blessings of God, not because God is unfaithful, but because Israel has not been faithful. And Zion says, Adonai has abandoned me. Adonai has forgotten me. And then Lord, no, I can't forget you. Can a woman forget her child at the breast? Not show pity on the child from her womb? Even if these were to forget, I would not forget you. I have engraved you in the palms of my hands. Your walls are always before me. And God does not forget. And this is what Moses is saying. I will not forget you. You are going to be there. You are always going to be there because I have a promise. And one, it's not Israel who is faithful. It is the Lord of Israel who is faithful. Now, what we see here, we continue with this, the next point. And now, for us, for Jews, remembering is a holy business. There's a day in the land of Israel today when we remember the Holocaust. And we remember things. And called Yom HaZikaron, the day to remember, the day to remember. Remember is part of the Jewish way of life. In each generation, each generation of Jewish people are reminded to remember. And what do we do? Remember what we do in Passover when we have the Passover Haggadah? We always say that the Haggadah, echoing the Talmud, agrees that every generation a man is bound to regard himself as though he personally had gone from Egypt. And the Torah tells us, they are for you to remember. This will be a day for you to remember. Hayah hayam Jose lechaim hazikaron. For us, in every generation, we are commanded to remember. Don't forget to remember, but be careful not to forget. Be careful not to forget. Have you ever, sometimes we forget because we don't pay attention. And what Moses is, why is Moses spending the time here repeating the things to the children of Israel? It's to pay attention. Remember the things. And in order to remember, God does two things. He repeats things, right? For instance, part of the parasha that we read today contains the second part, what in Judaism call it the second part of the Shema. The Shema was given in the previous chapter, chapter 6. Now in chapter 7, he repeats again, Shema, Shema, Shema. Why Shema, the word hear or listen, is mentioned 6 times in today's parasha? Because if we don't listen, we don't pay attention, and we don't pay attention, we forget. I am prone to lose. I'm not the only one. I can assure you that. I'm prone to lose my keys, and I'm prone to lose my phone. My cell phone didn't walk away. It just, I forgot where I left it. And why did I forget where I left it? Because I wasn't paying attention when I left it. Does it happen to me? Am I the only one? I don't want to see a raise of hand. Lucky you that I can't see you today, okay? Because I'm sure that I'm not the only one who doesn't pay attention, therefore I forget. I can't say it is the telephone's fault. It is my fault for not paying attention to where I left it. So when you don't see the presence of God in your life, don't say, God is not there. No, Shema, listen, pay attention. That's why God is repeating it again and again. Do not forget how to remember. It is a serious business. Do not forget, Adonai, your God. We will repeat that several times. And he will repeat a few things here. And he will go on to say that because of what God did, because remember that the parasha, the week parasha, the key word here is the word remember. Remember in the parasha, the name of the parasha is taken from first words. And we remember that in verse 12 of chapter 7 began saying, because you listen to this judgment, because we're reminded of who God is, because of what God did, because now he will say, now Israel, what does the Lord your God require from you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways and love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the Lord's commandments and his statutes, which I'm commanding you for you today, because it will be for your good. It's interesting that we see here, like the second part of the Shema, it repeats here in this passage. And let me just stop here, the screen share for a moment. Shema, it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your mind, with your heart, with your mind, and with your strength. Here is repeated again. It's interesting because as I was preparing for this week's parasha, one of the great Jewish commentators is Rashi. And Rashi makes a very interesting, he makes 4 points that are very interesting, because here we have in today's parasha like a repetition of the Shema. And the Shema is the basic principle of confession of faith. That's why in our meeting today, we recited the Shema. Here, O Israel, the Lord our God, and the Shema, here is, and then we have the second part of the Shema, and you shall love the Lord your God. And Yeshua himself says that is the greatest commandment. Remember when he's talking with a Jew who was inquiring from Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. And this is important. So important that Jesus said this is in loving God and hearing God and repeating. That's why every pious Jew will repeat the Shema every day and adding, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your might, with all your strength. It's interesting that Rashi says that in chapter 6, it is given in singular. Now, I was looking at the Hebrew grammar here, and I cannot fully understand what Rashi meant, because I don't deal with Hebrew text as well as I should. But Rashi, comparing the Shema that is mentioned here in chapter 7, 8, and 9, it says here that in the previous Shema, the one that we repeat every day, is given to the individual in singular. And here in English, we use you, and you can be singular, addressed to one person, or you plural, addressed to many people. But in ancient English, we use you and thou, or thou and you, and in order to compare. But in Hebrew, we do have a second person singular and second person plural. So in the first part, in the first Shema that we find in Deuteronomy chapter 6, he's addressing to the individual. That's why it says, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength or might. But here, in the repetition of the Shema, Rashi points out that it is addressed not to the individual, but to the community, because he's using the plural form of you in Hebrew. So it's reminded the people, but interestingly enough, you see what's missing in the Shema repeated in these chapters, in today's parasha, from the Shema that is said in the previous chapter? In the previous chapters, it says, and with all your might or your strength. Here it's not. Why? Because he wants to make sure that as a community, we don't rely on our own strength. It is, therefore, we rely in God's strength. So since these Shemas that are repeated in chapter 7, 8, 9, 10 are addressed to the people of Israel, but he takes away the with all your might, because the might of Israel is God. It's interesting that it comes out. And, sometimes we don't pick up the things and think we go in there. But let's see, why does the Lord say, now Israel, what does the Lord require from you? And it's interesting that we can link this with what we have been saying. You remember the parasha today is because of what he did, because of your failures, because of the promises I made, because of all of that, I require something in return. And let us look at, for a few minutes, in closing, at the 5 things that God requires because of what he did, because of who he is, because of the way he kept us. And remember that I just mentioned that in every generation, we got to consider things that God did to our forefathers, to our ancestors, as if he had done it ourselves. That's why, like I say, in Passover, it's like if I had been there. I wasn't there. I'm old, but not that old. But God wants us to remember that what he did for them, he did for us. What he did for them, he does for us. And he promised them, he promises us. But there's some requirements. Therefore, let me just go to the screen share. And let's take a look at the things that God is saying here. Now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require from you? Fear the Lord your God, walk in his ways and love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, not strength, remember? And to keep the Lord's commandments and his statutes, which I'm commanding you today for good. This is interesting. You see the word here? There are 2 key words here. He's commanding. So what God is saying here, these are not suggestions. This is not suggestion, why don't you try to serve me? Why don't you try to love me? Then I will love you. No. God saying, I love you in spite of you. I provide in spite of you. I will sustain you. Like I said, but this is my commandment. Now, these are not suggestions. These are not suggestions. These are commandments. If we want to receive the blessings that God has promised us today, here, now, the promises he made to the congregation, the promises that he made to his people, there are a few things here that he commands us. And what does require? Because, Akev, that's the key word, Akev. Because all what God does, all that God did, and all that he will do requires from us definite responses. And what are these 5 definite responses? First of all, to fear the Lord. To fear the Lord is you might take him seriously. It does not to be afraid of God, but to make sure that we are taking him seriously. That's what, it's so important that in the book of Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. To fear the Lord is to have reverence for God. Is to take him seriously. Because he's God, not because what he does, because he's God. We have to fear the Lord. And we got to figure to break his commandments. We figure of the Lord is to take God seriously and not to be trifled with. The next word is to walk. Now, walking is always in the a way of knowing that we are with the Lord, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. The life of faith is compared to a walk. It's particularly, you remember the Rabbi Shaul writes to the Ephesians, and Ephesians chapter, you read it again, and there's walking with the Lord is mentioned several times, and especially in the letter to the Ephesians 4:1, 4:17, 5:2, 8:15. Walking with the Lord. Walking with the Lord starts with that first step of faith in Yeshua, our Messiah. That walk with the Lord starts with yielding, allowing him to guide us, walking next to him, not walking the way we want and Jesus follow me. No, it's the other way. He says, Jesus, I am the way, the truth. Nobody, somebody wants to receive the blessings of eternal life, he must follow him. Walking with the Lord leads to fellowship with the Lord. And sometimes we see, like Martin Buber said, the sun is hidden from us. No, the sun is not hidden from us. We put something in between. Oh, God is not walking with me. I'm not experiencing God. But perhaps because we have walked away from the Lord, or we have stopped walking with the Lord. But walking with the Lord, that's what he says here. You have to walk because of what he does, because of what he did. You need to continue walking with the Lord. Not only on Shabbat, not only on Sunday, not only on special days. You walk with the Lord every day. This leads to a continuous fellowship with him as we walk on the road that he has set for us. Our life in Messiah starts with a step of faith, trusting in God and yielding ourselves to him. Christian walk means movement, implies progress. We're not standing in the same place. I hope that you're growing in your knowledge of God by walking next to him. So walking with the Lord is what God demands from us. He requires, you want all these blessings? Because what I did, don't you think it's good for you to walk with me? And then we come to this word, love. He requires love. Whoa. When I love Greek mythology and Roman mythology, never the Greek gods in Olympus never required love, but God says love. Love is a new concept. You never love the gods. You respect them, you fear them, you're afraid of them, but love God. You never say, no, love, because I have loved you. And he will say through the prophets, I have loved you with an everlasting love, although you have been unfaithful to me, says the book of Hosea. You have been unfaithful to me. I still love you with unfailing love. Now, loving God, how do we love him? He says here, with all your heart and with all your soul. The heart is the heart is the seat of our emotions. And, I love you with all my heart. I don't say to my wife, I love you with all my kidneys. It would be ridiculous. That's why the symbol of love is a heart. Because the seat of our emotions. It says, love me with your heart sincerely. Don't love me because you're afraid of me. Love me from your heart. Love me because you feel love. Love cannot be enforced. Love cannot be dictated. Love comes when you don't know the person. In order to love somebody, you got to know that person. That's why when we're dating somebody, before I got married, I just tried to see my wife every day. I was a seminary student. And we were engaged with Julia to get married. And every night, okay, and Jorge knows this, every night I was at seminary. After dinner in seminary, I will take one bus, one train, and another bus every night to go and see the one who was going to be my wife for 15 minutes, for 20 minutes. It would take me an hour, 15 minutes to get to see her. And I would see her just for 15, 20 minutes. Then I had to ride back to seminary dorms for another hour and a half. My friend said, David, are you nuts? Are you spending 3 hours every night to go and see Julia for 15 minutes? Let me tell you, it was worth it. Even if I had to see her for just 5 minutes, it was worth it. Why? Because I loved her. And the only way in which our love grew, and we've been married now for 54 years, is because I got to know her. I got to be with her. And to love the Lord, in order to love him, you got to know him. You got to spend time. You got to, even if it's a sacrifice, okay? It's not a sacrifice. I mean, don't tell me it was a sacrifice for me to spend 3 hours a day to go and see the one engaged, the one that I was engaged to be married. It's not a burden. When you love somebody, you do with all your heart. But it also says with all your nefesh, with all your spirit, with all your soul. And so it means not only have the feeling of loving God, but you know why. When it says nefesh here, and it says with all your spirit, means that you got to be connected to him. You have to get to know him. And it's a reasonable thing. It's not just an emotional thing. God doesn't only want our emotions, not only because we hear a beautiful hymn and we start weeping because we remember our parents. No. That's it. It may happen, but no, he wants more. He wants us to be reason. To reason. The Apostle Paul will say, present yourself as a living sacrifice, because that is your reasonable, the logical thing to do, because of all that God did for us, because, remember again, that today, because of what we did. Not only we love him because we just love him, we love him because it makes sense to love somebody who's done so much for us. Love him with all your heart. Love him with all your might. But then he continues on, and he says that not only we have to fear, walk in love, but also to serve him. To love and to serve. These are the 5 central elements. He will say this again, to serve the Lord. Serve the Lord. You will serve God. You will serve God, mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 10, 12, 15, 19, chapter 11, verse 1, 13, 22. Serve the Lord your God. If you love somebody with all your heart, if you do it because it's the reasonable thing to do, then you will serve the Lord. Serve the Lord doesn't mean you got to quit your job and everything. No. In every day, you can serve the Lord in your conversation. You can serve the Lord by sharing with others what God has done in your life. Or just, somebody said, preach every day, and only when necessary, use words. May your life speak so loudly that you love the Lord, and you serve him by your actions. You serve him by the way in which you live your life. Love is fulfillment of the law. So if we love God, serving him and keeping his commandments is not a burden. It's not a battle. It's a reasonable thing to do. These 5 elements that I mentioned here is something that we must keep. If we keep them, we will enter into God's promised land. Not only he's been faithful in the past, not only he's with us today, but we can look at a bright future. We can look into the promised land. And the promised land in a figure of speech means the future for us. The future for us is full of blessings. If we fear the Lord, if we walk with the Lord, if we serve the Lord, and we keep his commandments. close to our hearts. I hope that this parasha will help us to know the Lord better, and that we may receive and enjoy all the blessings that He is ready to bestow in our lives. May the Lord bless you abundantly this Shabbat and every day of your life.